Okay, item number 11, City Council discussion on landscape maintenance requirements and responsibilities of public right-of-way and providing feedback. Is there a staff report?
Yes. So there was a request to discuss different public right-of-way topics, and for tonight was the landscape maintenance requirements and responsibilities in public right-of-way. In the city, there's private property, and then for the public space, there's two categories that everything kind of falls into. It's whether it's a city-owned property, which would be a parcel, or if it's public right-of-way, which has like your streets, your alleys, it could be paths, and with the staff report, we have various definitions in an attachment A that are in our municipal code, most of which are based off of, from a planning perspective and zoning, but it's kind of parcels or public right-of-way. And we follow different design codes. So with like on a parcel, you have the building code, municipal code, and which most of us I think are used to. In the public right-of-way, it's in addition to the municipal code and resolutions, the city has its own standard plans and specifications for public right-of-way, and then there are standards that we follow with, there's one called the Green Book, we have county, state standards, if it's a roadway, vehicle code, and things like that. In terms of maintenance, the city has staff does projects which are more localized repairs and maintenance, and then we have our capital improvement program, or our CIP, which does bigger projects like pavements and slurry seal. And then from a landscaping perspective, there's fire safety, weed abatement, and landscape maintenance. The right-of-way, currently between those two contracts, the city tries to maintain the vegetation that exists throughout the city. And we manage the city-owned parcels, and then the right-of-way, and the current practice is if it's right-of-way, if it's the landscaping area that's in front of a private property, and it's more like a front yard, that's owned by the private property owners. If it's the right-of-way that's to the side of the parcel or behind it, kind of like in between a fence and the next roadway, then the city maintains that under its contracts or with its staff. And one example, and that is true also for areas near the school district or the golf club. However, there is a municipal code section that 12.16.060A that says that it's the duty of property owners to provide complete maintenance of all shrubs, lawns, and ground covers planted or set out within any of the streets, avenues, highways, and parkways adjacent to their real properties. And one item I wanted to clarify, that was a question we've received, is that parkways would include paths that are adjacent to a private property. So based off of the current municipal code, it would be the property owner's responsibility to maintain that area if it's adjacent to their parcel, and they would need to come to the city's public works department to get a permit in order to maintain this vegetation. For the city's current practice is that we perform landscaping and weed abatement for areas like those pathways and those parkways. It's just the areas that are more like someone's front yard that the city is not currently maintaining. So with that, we brought this here for the city council's discussion, and if the city council would like to modify the historic practice of landscape maintenance, then that would go on to kind of further discussion and analysis relating to notification of affected property owners, a potential grace period, what the enforcement process would be, and then impact to the current staffing levels. So with that, I'll defer back to the city council to discuss this item.
Thank you. So the reason I asked for this to be on the agenda is there seem to be a number of contradictions and inconsistencies in terms of how we approach our maintenance and the code and all of that. For example, the staff report says that it's the property's owners. They have to get a permit from Public Works to maintain the parkway adjacent. So that whole front section of your house, that's parkway, that your gardeners or your landscaping, according to code, you got to get a permit. And so, but we don't do that. That would be like ridiculous. And so that was one of the inconsistencies that I found. I actually talked to Honest to see Ann Carey about this yesterday. So either.
Well, can we start with that? Let's start with that. Want to break this down?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, let's break that down. So
Okay, so the spot right in front of somebody's house.
between the street and the property line.
Correct. And, I'll call it the
Specifically at
first
the
10.
Specifically in the front.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the front of the property.
Number of feet varies by property.
It does. I'm going to call it 10 feet, even though I know it varies by property and by street and all of that stuff. Okay, so it's the property owner's responsibility to maintain. So basically, it's to the street. I mean, we don't have sidewalks, so it's to the street, to the curb, to the street. And it's the property owner's responsibility to maintain that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if a property owner, which I did get the permits to landscape mine, I'm like, really? Nobody does that? So if you want to landscape it, you get a permit. And Carl definitely said, you're not going to like that shrub's going to do bad, or it's going to cause a problem in the street later, or, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we changed around some of the plants. Yep, great. Okay, so I have a permit to landscape that first. In my house might be 8 feet, but whatever it is. Okay. So what if, right, okay, so theoretically that's what people are supposed to do. But what if, like my neighbor, who I'm sure doesn't watch council meetings, it's just junk. That's just, pepper tree bushes that have just grown and grown and grown. They're clearly not, they didn't get at no point in time would they have gotten a landscape permit to put junk in that right away. And so what, if you didn't, so they didn't landscape it, it's just there. I don't know, it's weeds, whatever junk it is, but they're still theoretically supposed to trim it up, right? Keep it from falling into the street because it's a
And that's what I was.
traffic hazard.
That's what I was referring to. You have to get a permit to trim it, to maintain it, according to code.
Yeah, so those are two different items. So
Right.
there's the landscape plan that if there's square footage thresholds for when a landscape plan is required. And for that, when it's a front yard, it's combined if it's private property or public right of way. Those aren't separate square footages. It's just out of the yard that you're landscaping, what's the total square footage. And I think it's 250 feet or 500 feet? 500 feet, because that goes through community development. We review the trees and plants, but the plans go through community development. And so that's the landscape plan. What the mayor was referring to is once you go to maintain it, technically, since you're in the public right-of-way, you are supposed to have a permit to come and trim the vegetation.
So to mow the grass, to trim the shrubs that we have to keep to 30 inches according to code.
Historically, the city has never required a encroachment permit for mowing your lawn.
So I got a permit to landscape that section in the front of my house. Theoretically, because that's where my questioning was headed is, so I guess to me it's implied that if I got a permit to plant it, that it's my obligation to maintain it.
Yeah.
Because I have so I didn't think that was a separate permit. Because I have other neighbors who got the permit to landscape, and then they don't maintain it, and now it's total garbage.
Yeah, code says whether you planted it or not, code says you have a duty to maintain your parkway. I didn't plant my parkway. I inherited it, but I still have to maintain that bougainvillea that is constantly growing in the street.
They would need to maintain the public right-of-way, but that maintenance level wouldn't be, does it look ugly? That's not something from a public works requirement. There's not a public works requirement that says you have to make it look pretty. It would be that there's 30-inch height requirements because of visibility for vehicles, and that you couldn't have something leaning into the road, like weeds that are super tall and falling in. So it'd be more those kinds of requirements. Mm-hmm. And then if there was other conditions, like from the planning commission, with heights and hedges, sometimes that falls into place. But it wouldn't be that it's ugly, unless it had to become a nuisance in some way.
So the question is,
Continue.
if the code says that if you want to, for you to maintain the parkway, that code says you have to maintain, do we need to update the code? Do we still want to require people to get permits, although nobody does that? I mean, it just seems to me like we need to modify code and just take away the requirement to get a permit to maintain the parkway, but retain the requirement to get a permit to take care of trees.
Do we need to check for public comment before we're giving our opinions?
Okay, is there any public comment on this? Bob, you want
Go
to?
ahead, Bob, chime in.
Oh, he does.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
here he comes. Sorry, that's what you get for being the only member out there.
The last man standing.
Sorry for being the stand-in city attorney
That's okay.
briefly.
Bob Amos, 2417 Via Anna Kappa. So my only real question would be, is from the city street to my grass that gets mowed every week, there's theoretically a 10-foot easement that's considered public property, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
the parkway.
anything I do on that last 10 feet on Via Anna Kappa before I hit the actual blacktop is theoretically city property.
Yes.
No,
It's, well, no, it's right of way.
City right away, I guess. Right away would be correct. Would
No,
that,
it's not right away, and he doesn't own it. It's neither.
He does not own it. It's right away, so it's public property.
Yeah.
No, that is not correct.
I don't think that's
It's not.
true.
If you look at the
Okay.
assessor's map,
Their property,
And
but
that's not
easement
what
to
you
the
said.
public for right-of-way purposes.
It's not on their parcel.
it's not on the parcel, it's not on the
It doesn't-
LA assessor map.
That's not how it works. It's not, the fact that the parcel line, when you go to that's not how it works. The right-of-way is owned in fee by the adjacent property owner. The city's interest is an easement.
Then why can the city require them to plant something on their property?
Because the
Trees.
city has police powers and can do all kinds of things. Cities
The permit clearly says if the city, my permit clearly says if the city needs to get in there, they have the right to get in there.
Yes, of course.
If they have to get
Because
into the
because it's a-
right-of-way for
because it's a right-of-way.
utilities or
Because it's
whatever.
right-of-way.
Well, I think the question has always been, and this is why I was hoping the city attorney could weigh in on this, was who actually owns the right-of-way?
right. That's really my only question.
So there's the issue of who owns it, and then the issue of
A permit
maintenance
being required.
requirements and permitting
Right.
requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right-of-way
I wanna
can take either form. It can either be right-of-way that's owned in fee by a city, or it is an easement to the public for right-of-way purposes. It is on a private property owner's property. Depends on the particular parcel, what the nature of that would be. But it's still right-of-way, whether it's owned by the city or whether it's an easement for the benefit of the city.
Well, how do we
These-
find
these-
out who owns
Does that
it?
change
These-
parcel by parcel in a city?
To the point that she was making, though, if you go and you look at a parcel map, there is no parcel that includes the streets. There doesn't exist.
In
There's
other
not one
cities it
defined.
does.
Well, there's not here. And if there's no parcel, then it must be owned by the adjacent property owner. I mean, there's nothing recorded. The parcel doesn't exist.
So does that mean the paths between houses are,
I don't know, the paths,
join-
it depends. Some of the paths are parcels, and those are deed-restricted
Right.
parklands parcels that are owned by the city. Some of them are right-of-way, and you will not find a parcel for it. The county has no record.
so my question is, for that path that runs between two houses, is it owned by the two adjacent property owners up to the midline?
That is correct. The city attorney is looking at me like he's like,
I don't know if
maybe,
that's
I don't
true.
know.
Because I've heard a totally opposite argument, and that was my whole point of pulling this, and it sounds like we don't have the answer to that question.
As a practical matter, for the policy question, it doesn't really matter. The
Doesn't
city
matter who-
has the right to decide how, we can require the adjacent property owner to maintain the right-of-way. We could, for example, if we wanted to put in sidewalks, require people to build a sidewalk in the right-of-way. Many cities do that. There was a time in this city, many, many decades ago, in which in order to get a certificate of occupancy on new construction, you needed to have the road paved in front of your house. And if it was still dirt, you had to pay at your expense to pave the road. Now, we don't do that anymore. We don't require people to maintain the road in front of their house, but the city has the right to require the adjacent property owner to maintain the right-of-way in whatever manner it chooses.
Okay, thank you. So Back to my
Where does
question.
that leave us?
Yeah. on
It leaves us
maintenance-
with, decide whatever policy position you want, which I think the only reasonable one is, people should be able to maintain the right-of-way in front of their house, with the exception of trees perhaps over a certain height, or that have been planted by the city, without the requirement for a permit. And I think that every other instance of right-of-way where the adjacent property owner does not directly benefit from it in the way that they do the portion in front of their house, it is the city's responsibility. This would include, well, with the exception of the construction of curbs, which is a standard condition of approval on new construction, it would include things like the roads, and if you had an unimproved alley behind your home, or if you had a very sloped lot and then you had right-of-way that was like, you had a street-to-street lot and you had right-of-way that was, 800 feet out your back door and way past your fence line, you're probably not going to require people, notify all those people that they got to go start trimming that.
I guess I have a different I agree with your comment about the parkway in front of your house. So we've got people who are on corners, so they only have to maintain the front, they don't have to maintain the side, their side property?
Well, no, of course. If you're in a corner lot, then yes.
Okay. And then I actually do think residents who have a street-to-street lot do get benefit from that street-to-street lot. They don't have a house behind them. They have improved privacy. They don't have to listen to their neighbor's dog barking all the time. Okay, that's just a personal thing.
You can still hear the dogs, I assure you.
But I do think you get a benefit. So, right, that's the benefit of having street-to-street lot. So my thing is,
I just think it depends sometimes on the nature of the street-to-street lots. Some street-to-street lots really are like flat level lots that go street-to-street. The property owner, in some cases, what ends up happening, because they cannot erect a fence within the right-of-way, they end up having a fence that's way behind their house, and then they have another 8 or 10 feet behind that in the street. I think it's a open question whether you would want people in that case, in the case of a flat lot, to maintain that. But we have a lot of areas in this city where we have heavily sloped lots. So, for example, out here on PV Drive West, if you go down there, you're going to see right-of-way that is technically adjacent to a property owner that's up on, like, Mexico Place. I mean, the idea that you would tell those people to maintain that is outrageous. You couldn't reasonably do it because you'd be chasing each one of these people. It would always be haphazardly done. One would be done and then the next one wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm not sure that is right-of-way. Some of that's parkland, that what you're
Maybe,
talking
but I mean,
about.
there's lots
The
of
Mexico
examples that are
Place
similar.
Well, in the
example.
back of my house, like there's the fence, and I do have a street-to-street lot, and then it goes really super steep, like straight down, and it's got like kind of crazy vegetation, and every time we think, well, maybe we should pull that vegetation out of there? I don't know. But it actually offers some protection by having that thick growth in there, because now somebody can't really climb up into the back of my property and get up over the fence, so.
So you're getting a benefit.
For us, yeah, I mean, there is protection in that, and, I don't let it go into the street, but I keep it pretty thick back there so that no one can get up that hill.
All right, so
If they were inclined to drive.
two questions. One is, can we have a staff follow-up on who actually owns it right away so that we can be very clear and document it? So that in any future discussions like this, the answer can be very plain and simple and have it documented. Two, I'm unclear. Is the code clear or is the code not clear relative to, I'm not talking about side yards, homeowners maintaining that front strip of right-of-way in front of their home? Is it clear?
To them, or in our code? Like,
In our
how do you know when you
code.
buy the house, you're supposed to?
Yeah, in our code. I mean, if there's some question about, we'll get it, let's skip the whole tree argument for a minute, and let's just deal with, grass, bougainvillea, whatever it is, that I'm responsible for maintaining that, and I don't need to go to the city to get a permit to do it, or be slapped because I didn't. Is that how it's currently written, or do we need to address that?
The code doesn't address front, side, or back.
Yeah.
The code says, "It is made the duty of all owners and persons having possession and control of real property within the city to cultivate and care for and provide complete maintenance of all shrubs, lawns, and ground covers planted or set within any of the streets, avenues, highways, and parkways adjacent to their real properties." So that would say any parkway. Now, if we want to
right,
make a
let's-
policy change, then we can do that.
Let me use an example. I don't know that you've seen it, but Jim and I visited a property related to right-of-way discussions in which there's a right-of-way that runs all the way along the side of a house that was under construction, Monomalaga. And sort of the ensuing discussion was, well, geez, is the city going to be responsible for maintaining that right-of-way, in perpetuity in its landscape maintenance contract? Or does that become the responsibility of the homeowner? And if it's responsibility of the homeowner, would they ever do it? Because it doesn't look like it's part of their property.
Well, I don't think people realize that it is Parkway officially and that they have right-of-way and they have that responsibility.
So how does that become clear to someone that
We need,
Does the Homes Association have a say in what gets landscaped into the right-of-way there? Yeah, looking at you. I'm just kidding.
I don't
Because how would you keep,
think so.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking if you walk, every house could be different. Like, how do you keep one from being DG stone? Some people plant grass all the way to the street. Some do a border with DG stone or wood chips or,
I would have to follow up on what material requirements they have. I don't know about plants, like vegetation, but I thought they had requirements for, like, if it was stone or DG, then I thought had, but I would have to follow
Oh,
up.
well, and is DG hardscape? So then does that go to your
Yes.
lot coverage?
Got it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's
Not
that's a
permeable.
And we don't-
fairly new rule, but yes, I think DG goes to hard to.
Yeah.
It's not
coverage.
permeable, right?
Also, we usually don't have DG in the public right away.
unless it's across the street from my house, but
Yeah.
that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I could point out a few other houses.
I'll say, I know I've seen some, but.
I mean, I would say in general, residents, and I put myself in that camp, aren't aware of our codes, the responsibilities,
Most people don't read it.
Most people are.
that city trees actually exist, right? Carrie asked me, when did I find out I had a city tree? And it wasn't until somebody came and started trimming it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what are you doing to my tree? And found out it wasn't my tree. So,
I think most.
So somehow
people-
we need to
most
do better
people
communication.
maintain- I think most people, I think it's intuitive that you're going to maintain in front of your house to the street. Probably not intuitive that if you wanted to do something special in there, you were supposed to get a permit.
right. And I also think it's probably not intuitive that if you have a street-to-street, you do the back, or that if you have a path, which is right-of-way in between, or it's actually parkway, that you're responsible for that as well. So we, as a council, need to look at our code, and we need to decide our policy, and what is the city going to do, and what are we going to do a better job of communicating what residents need to do. And so that's why, when I think about this, I start with the parkway, and I start with the existing code, which says adjacent to their real properties, which to me is 360 degrees around. Now, if we don't want that to be our code, because that's not our practice, then we got to reconcile that conflict.
Well, and the other challenge, because, we're not a city subdivision with sidewalks. Every lot's somewhat different.
They are. They totally are.
I mean, if the back of your house goes, all the way down versus a small house that's right up against the street, Lenata Bay versus Malaga Cove, and how different,
Yeah, totally different. Interesting.
I mean, I think we need to be consistent, and we need to not have contradiction. So let's start with the parkways. What I'm hearing is we don't think people should have to pull a permit to maintain the parkway. Is that correct? Except
By
for
the
trees.
parkway, you're referring to the
You're
right-of-way
talking about the right-of-way in front of someone's house,
adjacent to,
adjacent to their property, right?
I'm talking about the right-of-way adjacent to their real property, right?
Except trees.
with the
Except for
exception of
trees.
trees. Yep.
so I'm sorry, was parkway defined as
Parkway
from the curb?
is defined as the portion of the public right-of-way other than the roadway or sidewalk.
Okay, would an unimproved alley be considered a roadway?
Parkway.
Probably going to be right away.
Okay, so I mean,
Oh, yeah, because you
Then you
had
run
an
into
issue with
problems.
some of the alley, yeah, what was
So
your
do we,
issue with the alleys?
do we carve out alleys? Do we do alleys differently?
Yeah, I'll say alley in the municipal code is a public thoroughfare or way having a width of not more than 20 feet, which affords only a secondary means of access to abutting property. It's not defined as being unimproved. So it could be a paved alley.
I mean this
Way our
with,
municipal.
I mean,
There's a primary way in, aren't
Yeah.
I mean this with love, not impatience. Are we really going to sit here and decide this, like piece by piece by piece?
I'm not sure what it is we're trying to decide.
My perspective on this is I think that essentially the status quo is working just fine. I don't think that there's anything that's happening in the city with respect to the maintenance of right-of-ways that is contrary to the public policy we would likely adopt. I do think that maybe one direction would be, I don't think that people should need a permit to mow their lawn, and so if that's a simple change we can do, we'd give that direction, but
We could bring back an ordinance to make the change that no permit is required to maintain the right-of-way, except for trees. We can just change it to trees. No. That's
You
not for
still
the.
would need
that's
your
not-
landscape plan.
that's a different
That's just
thing.
You just wouldn't need for a
It's like labor
lawnmower.
agreements. Everything going forward is excluded.
See, I have a different perspective, because there are some people who the city is doing services for.
Well, I think this
I
was
don't
where
think
you were.
that's right.
So why don't you head us there? Because
Okay,
that's,
so-
That's
was
my
your
issue.
So
My
say again what
issue,
your is.
my issue is that there are some properties, one of them used to be Via Coronel, which borders the school property. We were maintaining their right-of-way. Staff has since successfully transitioned the school district to now maintaining that, so that's great. We are maintaining right-of-way around the golf course in spite of the fact that the concession agreement clearly states that the golf course is responsible for maintaining everything around, I
So
don't
that-
have the right words, it's in the staff report.
So that policy is currently accurate, which doesn't require a change from us. It just requires modification of the landscape maintenance agreement potentially.
Right.
And direction from staff to the golf course to comply with their agreement.
Right, so that one should be a pretty basic one, and whether it's landscape maintenance or fire abatement, that's fine. Then we run into situations.
Is that a change that so the past practice hasn't been to follow what is in the contract?
Oh, no. We want to
has.
follow what's in the contract, or we
That's
want
why
to
I just
change
wanted to
it.
make sure, because I didn't want to change the past practice without the council being aware.
Well, it's weird,
Past
because
practice being what, that
That
you
the
were maintaining?
city, yep, the city has been maintaining the right-of-way around the golf club.
well, the golf club does some of it.
Even the part between the fence and the street?
They do some of it, and then
As I say,
we
they do
part
some of
it.
They
it.
do that part, the part like
On
right
Via
in front
Campesina?
of, right in front of the
Yeah.
club, but when you get a little bit farther along their
If the
campus
split
border.
rail fence isn't just visible from the street, those areas the city's been maintaining.
On this point that Don is making, I agree completely. School district-owned land and all of the concessions should be maintaining their right-of-way, and the city should not. It would probably save us a fair amount of money. It's not contrary to our current policy, though. We should just be.
Correct.
Right.
It's a.
But we need
practice
council to
change.
provide that direction
Yes.
to the practice change.
So do you,
If we did not want, I'll pick on the golf course. If we did not want them to follow their concession agreement, then we would change their concession
I
agreement.
was just going to say,
Right.
you need to make sure that the code and the concession agreements line up, too.
It does.
Right?
It does.
Right, so
I
if
haven't checked out the
someone.
concessions. I know the golf course.
With all due respect to who the someone was or is or was, if someone just decided suddenly to start maintaining it and put it on the city's bill, that wasn't at the direction of the city council.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the history. That's why I wanted to make sure.
Okay. And then there are probably 11 properties, 12 properties, whatever, within the city, where the city is maintaining side or back parkways. So if the code says.
Adjacent to someone's house.
Adjacent to somebody's house, to someone's
Really?
real
I
property.
think it's more than that. I think it's a lot more than that.
I looked through the map here. Maybe it is.
Yeah, okay, so you're going based on what the contract has on it. I think that if we were going to send notifications to people that they needed to begin maintaining, it's going to end up being a lot of people. I think before we want to know how many people would get that notification. There's going to be a lot of people.
What do you refer?
do you-
You're not talking about.
Yeah, what do you,
Not the 30
Victoria's lot
inches.
is a perfect example, right?
Right.
Because it's a sloping lot, it goes down, and, I mean, are you telling the
right.
gardener to
You're right.
drive around and weed whack the back of the, you know?
You're right.
like once a year, if it spills into the street, we whack it.
My count was 12 right-of-ways. I didn't count the number of
The
properties.
city,
You're
but the
right.
city's
You're right.
not keeping is not maintaining my 10, doing maintenance on my first 8 feet or 10.
No, they're
feet.
not.
No,
On the
no.
back?
On the back of my house? No.
It's part of the Bennett contract.
Well, they've never done it, and neither has any other
Well, that was
contractor
State
before
Green.
that.
We
Let
have a
me
refund?
see. Where's that list?
Yeah. I don't know.
How do, yeah, see, okay, you know what the
Figure out which
overriding
ones
thing
you-
on here is?
Consistency.
Well, that and a frickin' zoning map of every single.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cheryl's working
Hello.
on it.
A zoning map so that we can, whoa, look at every single thing. And so, okay, so my parcel wasn't on State Green's list.
Well, either we added things or they just never did it. I don't know.
That is so funny.
I never had a
Never
map
been done.
for Stay Green. So I do appreciate the map because I'm a visual person. It's easier than a list
It's
with
way
a
easier than a
description.
list.
It's like, what does this mean?
It's like 10 pages.
So my point is kind of what Michael just said. We just need to be consistent.
Yep.
And we need to be in, not compliance, but we need to map to the code. And wherever we're not consistent, we need to decide, all right, are we going to have exceptions or are we going to modify the code? That's my point. So the first one was the maintenance. We figured that out. The second one was the golf course. We figured that out. I think we've already figured out the school district. I don't know, part of Malaga School, the upper part, I'm assuming that might be
That should be school
Parkland.
district.
I don't know if it's school district or where the parkland starts. So then the last piece is, what do we do about back and side parkways of adjacent real property?
Wait, time out. You said it, so I'm going to go back there. Let's go to that Via Almar Malaga Cove section where it's from the baseball fields up to where Via Almar runs down the hill. I believe there's an agreement that was created between the city and the school district relative to that path that goes down to those baseball fields, and that the school district is responsible for the maintenance of that.
The city is responsible for the maintenance of the path, but not the rest of the area. It is that there's a dimension, I think it's 6 feet, but I have to go double check. I think it's that the city needs to make sure the path is within that 6 feet, and so what we put in the landscape contract was maintaining just that width.
So whatever that, so
then the
whatever
rest-
is in the agreement matches what the designation is in the landscape maintenance contract, I'm good.
We don't maintain any of along the sidewalk on Via Almar?
We're not supposed to now. That was a discussion that
Okay, good.
came up with.
That was the one I wasn't sure about. Okay.
That was, I haven't gotten confirmation that we're on the same page, but according to that agreement that Councilmember Kemp's mentioned, it just says the path. And the path zigzags when you're physically out there. That's not the designated path in the contract. It's a straight line.
So can you confirm for us that you are on the same page? with the
That's,
school
yeah,
district?
I'm coordinating with them.
Okay. All right, so then the
What
last,
about George Allen Field?
The city is responsible for outside the fence, and the leasee is responsible for inside the fence. And that's how that license agreement is written.
So how do you explain that the perimeter around George Allen Field is cut about 10 or 12 feet from the street, and then weeds, and the baseball field?
That is something that the city's landscape vendor did that we're following up with them on.
is it possible that the right-of-way has a different frequency than the open space in between?
It has the same, but they for some reason didn't do them at the same time.
Okay. Okay. All right, so back to parkways on the side and back of real adjacent,
Well, don't change the policy until after Bennett trims the back.
it's not the policy.
I can't
The que- Are we changing the
Can we
policy
have
or
an
are we
ethics
changing the
conversation
practice?
while we're at it?
Kidding, people.
Which are we changing?
All right.
The policy or the practice? I lean towards changing the practice. I think Jim leads towards
Yeah, I
changing
don't-
the code.
I don't want to send a notice to, what I think will end up being hundreds of residents telling them that they are now responsible for something.
I don't
they-
think it's going to be hundreds.
Well, do you want to get your arms around what the magnitude of that
Let's
before we make a decision?
Let's do that.
I mean,
Let's
if it's
find out.
Well, and
not
here's-
hundreds, then it's not material. If it is
Here's where
hundreds,
this
then,
is going to go.
Well,
Then-
it's not about money, it's about
Oh, yeah, sure it
consistency
is.
and making sure, well, I mean, the money is a piece of it, but it's like, why are we doing maintenance for someone and not for someone else? I mean, if that's the case, I would like someone to maintain my parkway because my husband has to put cones up and risk his life every time he has to go maintain that thing because people zip around the curve. So if we're going to do random people's
I guess
parkways,
we're
I want
never
mine
going to know
done.
the history, but I'm a little baffled as to how that came to be.
What, the people zip around the curve?
No.
That too. Wake up,
Why the
Chief.
city is maintaining I mean, I'm sorry
don't know.
about that, because you're right, people do whip around that corner, but that curve, but,
Could you find out how many houses that is? I
I
think,
mean, I guess, yeah, I'm kind of baffled as to how,
We need a decision point, and the question is, how many will actually be impacted? And ultimately, what I was going to say is where this is, I mean, this is going to end up being a budget discussion, right? And it's going to end up, I'll use the T word, it's going to be a tax discussion. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, do all the residents contribute to this contract, which is maintaining these things, and do we want to maintain status quo? Or is this one of the things that they'll choose that they don't want to pay for, which will then cause the notices? They're interconnected.
I don't think you can tease out what they're willing to pay for and not pay for.
Tease out?
I'm just curious about
You
this whole
said, are
concept.
they willing to pay for this level of landscape maintenance? How are you going to determine, is it that they're willing to pay for? Is it the fire abatement? Is it the police department? Is it something else? More tree trimming? Unless you do a conjoint analysis, you're not going to be able to figure out what the trade-offs and values are. But that's a different conversation.
One that involves Advil and wine.
So
I have another issue, but keep going.
do we need to address alleys? Alleys are, I forget what alleys are now. Are they parkway, are they right-of-way? I mean,
You said they're roadway, right?
Alleys are right away.
alleys are right-of-way,
Public right to,
but not a parkway, which means then our code is okay when it comes to alleys, and we should continue to maintain alleys?
they would be, isn't Parkway, they would be Parkway because it would be public right of way that's not roadway or sidewalk.
If it's not paved,
So if
right?
it's paved, it would be roadway. If it's not paved, it would be Parkway.
And then the adjacent property owner would be responsible for maintaining it if it was an unpaved alley.
Do we, that strikes me as a little odd. So, do we want to carve out on whatever, unimproved alleys?
carve them out in what way? I mean,
That the
should,
city maintains it rather than the
Yes.
adjacent property owner, unless it comes down to an encroachment, then the encroachment
Are we
has to
talking
be-
about changing the code, or are we just talking about what we're using for our landscape contracting and what the direction is?
Well, if we're going to decide that the city maintains unimproved alleys and the code says the adjacent property does, then we should be making a change. I know
The
that we
obligation
don't,
doesn't prevent us from, maintaining it ourselves, even if they have the obligation. So if you,
Well, that makes it very unclear to staff going forward what the hell to do. That's the problem.
because they always refer to code unless we create a policy and not really recommending that. I've got a few other policies I need to finish.
By May 15th.
So what do we do about unimproved alleys?
Unimproved.
what's it say in the code? Oh, right now, the adjacent property owner is supposed to maintain it.
Correct.
Code.
According to the code, yes.
Yeah. Probably not.
have we been maintaining those?
Yes.
We are
Do we have
maintaining
any?
them. Oh, yeah, we got lots of them. La Costa.
We have a few.
Yours is paved, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I was to say, most of the ones I think of are paved.
There's a
You just
few-
think they're paths or trails. They're not. They're actually unimproved alleys, and no one ever stuck a garage on them, so they never got paved.
But then, like,
Interesting.
Athens uses them for trash pickup, there's
Yeah.
utilities back there.
Well, that's where I was headed. I was on some of those, shouldn't Athens be sweeping through there?
Well, you can't sweep
What, with
dirt.
weed
But not
whackers?
the unimproved, right, no, I recognize that. Yeah, no, I was thinking that's what I was thinking, most were paved.
There's a
and that
couple.
Athens was actually maintaining them.
There's a couple that are unimpaved that are dirt.
Good or dirt, okay.
In general, just like the concession agreements matching what we're actually doing, I think we want to make sure that code matches what you've already spent a lot of time getting up to speed with and matching the landscape contracts with, so that in the future, if anybody else is here and we're all gone and so are you,
Yeah.
they can step right in and they say, oh, code matches the practice. Fantastic. We're going to hold the vendors accountable to that, and guess what? We're going to split it up into 4 pieces and bid it to 4 different ones, or we're going to bid it to a new one, and we've got it exactly right. And, you know, somebody by the name of Carl or Anastasia don't have to tell us how to do it. I think that's the goal.
Perfect.
Any major policy change that would require suddenly homeowners to do something massively different than they're doing today will be a very large challenge to enforce.
Or to at least inform.
Both.
Yeah.
And so we'll come back with a count for the ones that have the side or behind the parcels, so that we know what that impact is and have that discussion again.
Would that include a budgetary impact?
I can have the dollar amount from our current contract.
Yeah.
That's easy enough.
So, I mean, you know, so hey, what you're
It's not
talking
huge,
about, right?
It's like 30 grand.
Well, there it is.
That's why I said it's, you know. The other elephant in the room is paths. Paths are parkways, according to code. Property owners are responsible for doing the paths. We've got a vendor doing the paths. It seems weird that I do my half of the path, then you do your half of the path. But we've got this contradiction that's, once again, to Kemp's point, we've got to figure out how do we decide what the solution, the right approach is so that people who come after us are following.
I think in a city that heavily prioritizes its paths, its parkland, and cares deeply about its landscape maintenance, that making assumptions that homeowners will do things when some have more time, money, interest, and effort to invest in it, as opposed to others, will cause different results. And so I don't know that the city has any choice but to maintain those.
And a patchwork of results.
I agree, so then the question is.
A patchwork. I mean, I'm only responsible for this, so I'm doing it today, May 15th, and then, I don't know, 2 months later, someone does the patch next to it. I mean, this just isn't the policy that anyone would want.
Well, it's not the look we want either, you're right.
Right.
So the question is, then what do we need to do to document that that's, I was going to say the path that we've chosen, that wasn't intentional. Because we're in conflict right now, so I don't want, you know, somebody 10 years from now to say, hey, paths are parkways, what the hell, what do we do?
When this is all done, I promise to say, and that has made all the difference.
Whatever. But we do need, but I am interested in making sure that residents are not spilling over into the paths. I can't spill over, my foliage, my vegetation can't spill over into the street.
Those are encroachments.
We shouldn't be spilling over onto the paths, because then what happens is BATS has to go in, and this is why the BATS contract is so big, because they have to take their chainsaw and go like this along the wall because somebody's vegetation, so clearly we need to do a better job of managing encroachments and resident control of their vegetation.
For staff that's not been here as long as we have, that has been an issue since we have been here and beyond.
Okay, so have we given you enough direction about what we want, where we've identified the inconsistencies that we want practice to match the agreement, the code and our concession agreement, that there are a few areas that right now we agree with the contradiction to code, and what's the path forward to get that memorialized so that
Yes.
no one else has to
So-
waste an hour on this?
I think you sent staff to investigate the impact of some of these changes, and so I suggest having that brought back with a report, and then an option either to make a change to the code, adopt a policy, or just making a change to the landscape contracts. Those could be the options brought back. In terms of, I think there was agreement on changing 12.16.030. This is the permit that was required. Requires a permit for shrubs or for trees. If you want to direct staff to return with an ordinance deleting the word shrub, so it would only be applying to trees, we can just move forward with that. I don't think that needs to be brought back if you're all in agreement.
So moved? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So I agree with what you just said, and then if you could, come back to us with a report,
Okay.
kind of telling us what our options are, that would be great. All right.
Is the city maintaining all the little, I think we typically call parklets?
All those round things?
You know, they're like, they're hardly ever round, but yeah, round, rectangular, yeah, all different shapes. But does the city maintain those?
Yes. I think there's some locations where private parties are doing some maintenance just because that I've heard about, but in general, the city.
Well, I think
Well,
some of
that's
that was some of that was in response to the lack of maintenance.
And then there's some that I've heard about from staff that, oh, so-and-so's been doing this for 20 years.
Well, that's why I brought it, and
There's a couple.
you guys were kind of talking about the consistency along the parkways. You're like, oh, okay, we can't have this patchwork thing going, because years ago, some resident probably said, hey, the parklet by my house isn't being maintained. And so I had come probably to, whoever at the time, and they said, no, the maintenance of parklets is the responsibility of the homeowners next to the parklets.
No.
I've heard this, I've never seen it, but I've heard that there were some of those little, like a circular little median thing, like at the end of a cul-de-sac, where it was somehow the water was coming from the private property, kind of similar to the discussion we had at the other park, but where it was coming from the private property, and that was part of when you moved in, it was like, well, you're the one who's paying for water at this little median.
It's part of
And
your
so,
deed.
but I don't know if that was actually written into anything, but apparently that used to exist. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the history of the city, people were also maintaining the parklets.
So if there are any of those we need to solve for, we need to know.
Yeah. So I don't think there's much of that now, but.
Okay. Because that's, again, where you'd get inconsistencies, right? Like, especially people would be like, oh, I'm maintaining this part, but it's kind of in front of my house, but you got to do the part in front of your house, and
Yeah.
it just seems.
Any areas that I've heard about, that if it's like
People-
a median or something like that, then I've directed the staff that we'll maintain it. It's part of our landscape contract.
More than just the 5 houses that face it, everybody gets enjoyment.
Everyone's
from
using
those.
it.
Everyone's using it, everyone's looking at it, everyone's enjoying it, okay, I was just curious if there's anything more, more of that out.
Oh, it's been more than a month, and this is a landscape maintenance item, so it's time for this again. Can we put grass back in the medians?
Which medians?
The triangle.
No, there's no irrigation out there.
Yes, there is.
Okay, moving right along.
I'll hit it again in the council member agenda item request.
That's the end of that item.